I think the title for the presentation today is "It Can Never Happen to My Child," and I think that's really appropriate because we always feel that all these things, all the dangers online, all these bad things that happen to young people online, they always happen to somebody else's children. We read about things and we hear things, and we never think they can happen to our children because we always feel that, we're good parents, we look after our children, we treat them well, we give them good homes. But actually, the truth is, I guess I should call this presentation, "It Can Never Happen to My Child Until It Does." And that's a sad reality because, there are people to whom terrible things have happened, and a lot of it is online. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Ofsted report that came out a couple of years ago now around safeguarding in schools. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the sort of social media apps that you need to be aware of, a little bit about Snapchat and TikTok especially, and then I'll give you some sort of practical, perhaps, advice on some of the things that you can do to just be a bit more aware of what's going on online, and also just be, help to keep your children safe online, because it's a dangerous old world out there. So the objective today really is to open up a dialogue about digital parenting to ensure you as a parent feel more confident about your child's digital world. I'm not going to solve your problems in the next half an hour, but what I'm going to try and do is just open up a dialogue, which we can either carry on later, you can carry it on with me at another time, or indeed it gives you the opportunity to research for yourself and find out a bit more about what's going on in your child's digital world. So a little bit about me. So my name is Amit Kalley, as Aruna mentioned. And I think I said, those of you who caught it, I used to work in education. I used to be a head of sixth form, an assistant head teacher, and a deputy head teacher in secondary schools across London. I now work for myself. I run my own business. It's called the Working Parent Company, which is just about to launch actually, but I'm a parenting inclusion specialist. So I support organizations around parenting and being inclusive for their parents. I'm also a parent and teenage coach. So I work with parents and with teenagers to improve communication between the two. I find that the gap now between parents and teenagers from a communication point of view is bigger than it's ever been. I do keynote and public speaking. I also have my own podcast called What Do Parents Know, which actually might be relevant for many of you because you're the target audience. Parents of children and teenagers are the target audience. And I try to raise awareness. I have guests on there to raise awareness on issues that teenagers and young people go through. And we don't shy away from issues. We tackle issues that are sort of more regular, like exam anxiety, but we deal with issues that are much heavier, like child sexual exploitation. So it's available on all major platforms. So please, if you have some time, they're half-an-hour episodes, go ahead and have a listen. But less about me and more about, the presentation. And the first bit I want to talk about really is the schools. Obviously, I don't know anything about the schools that your children go to, and I'm not for 1 second suggesting that all schools are bad. But there was a big report that came out. The government asked Ofsted to carry out a report in 2021, actually, around sexual abuse in schools, and the extent to which it is happening in schools. And actually, when we think about the word safeguarding, we're talking about the action that's taken to promote the welfare of children and protect them from harm. You as parents are involved in that process, as is anybody, any adult who is caring for your child, basically. And it's the protection of children from abuse and maltreatment, preventing harm to their health and development, ensuring they grow up with provision of safe and effective care, and taking action to enable them to have the best outcomes. If something goes wrong in that process, if there is a safeguarding issue, we then move it to child protection. And that's focusing on protecting that child and stopping any further harm occurring to that child. So you may or may not have had experience with this with schools or with local authorities, but it's really to keep children safe. So you as parents are involved in that process. You're key stakeholders in keeping your children safe. So I guess a little quiz, which if you want to put into the chat actually might be the easiest way to do this, is I'm going to give you some acronyms, and I want you to just put in the chat, please, if you know what these acronyms stand for. So hopefully this will work okay. There are the acronyms. We've got CSE, CCE, HSB, DV, DA, FGM, HBV, HBA. If you know what any of those stand for, please just pop them into the chat now, because these are all important acronyms that as parents we need to be aware of. So please feel free to pop into the chat any of those that you know. I'll give you maybe 30 seconds to just, it doesn't have to be in any order. As soon as you recognize one of them, please just pop them in. Okay, we've got a couple coming in: domestic abuse and domestic violence. Okay. Anybody else want to pop anything into the chat? So DA and DV seem to be quite easy, quite popular in terms of knowing what they stand for. Anybody know what CSC and CCE stand for? FGM is what? Yeah, thank you. Someone's put that in. Aman, thank you. Child sexual exploitation. Thanks, Cam. You're absolutely right about FGM. Don't worry about the spelling. Female genital mutilation. And we'll talk about, we can talk about some of that, I guess. But yeah, well, CSE is child sexual exploitation. A lot of that happens online. It's where young people are groomed basically for sexual purposes. CCE is child criminal exploitation. Again, a lot of that happens online. That's when young people are recruited online to carry out crimes, often county lines, and that's around transportation of drugs. HSB is harmful sexual behaviours. Young people can often be involved in sexual behaviour that can be harmful to themselves or other people. DV and DA, I think we got domestic violence and domestic abuse. FGM, we got female genital mutilation, something that is against the law in the UK, but is carried out in certain cultures and certain countries. And HBV and HBA, probably quite relevant in our community, in the Asian community, is honour-based violence and honour-based abuse. That is where young people are abused or treated violently, or in worst case scenarios, actually killed based on something they've done that disobeys or goes against the honour of their family or their culture. And I guess a trigger warning here from me, if any of this brings anything up for anybody listening, perhaps you can have a chat with Orana or myself afterwards. So let's think about the sexual abuse, that report and what it said about schools. And ultimately, in June 2021, Ofsted published a government-directed review, and they found that sexual abuse was prevalent in schools across the country. And this ranged from primary schools to secondary schools. So those of you with young children, don't think it doesn't happen in primary schools. Ofsted found that it does. And what does it include? It includes, some of the very worst things down to things that you might see as a bit more trivial. So the worst things being violence, rape, and assault, to sexual harassment, sexual comments, jokes, remarks, upskirting, which is actually against the law now, and that is when people take photographs of ladies from underneath their skirt. I don't know why I'm actioning here, so you can see what I'm doing. I'm sort of showing it, but and then finally sexting, which is basically when young people are texting each other, but in a sexual nature, which can sometimes get a bit out of hand. And Ofsted made it clear to all school leaders that they should assume sexual abuse is happening in their schools. Well, I don't know whether your school leaders, whether your head teachers have spoken to you or written to you in the last year or so about what they're doing to tackle sexual abuse in schools. But if any head teacher says to you that it's not happening in their school, that head teacher is lying. Because Ofsted have told us that every head teacher needs to assume it's happening in their school, because that's what the research has shown. The extent to which it happens, of course, will vary. But I just want to share some data that came out of that Ofsted review, actually. And you can see there is a big difference between what girls were saying versus what boys were saying. The question here was, these things happen a lot or sometimes between people my age. So girls, for example, 65% of girls said that they were victims of unwanted touching or feeling pressure to do sexual things they did not want to do. Or there were rumours being spread around sexual activity or sexist name-calling. Over 90% of girls said they were victims of sexist name-calling. That figure is still quite high for boys, 75%. So really, this is all taking place in schools, and this is all young people that have responded to these questions. Another chart shows us, again, these things happen a lot or sometimes between people my age, and this is where the digital world really is important. Being sent pictures or videos they did not want to see. Almost 90% of girls surveyed said that they were sent pictures or videos they did not want to see. Sexual pictures or videos, I should add, of course. Another one, being put under pressure to provide sexual images of themselves. 80% of girls have been put under that pressure. I must say, when I was an assistant head and a deputy head, and I was responsible for safeguarding, a lot of what we were dealing with, certainly at the school that I was at in East London, a lot of what I was dealing with was mainly young girls sending inappropriate images of themselves to boys. And there's two problems there. One is the boys that were being coercive and, encouraging the girls to send them. And two, of course, the girls feeling that they had to send them. A lot of this happens on Snapchat. So I don't know whether your children have Snapchat, but that's the main app this happens, because the boys will convince the girls that the picture's going to be, it's going to disappear because that's what Snapchat does. But of course, when they send it, they screenshot it, they share it with their friends. And I'm generalizing. I'm not saying boys can't be victims of this. Of course they can. But you can see the data there for yourself. You can see that girls were finding that the school environment is they just don't feel safe in school anymore. So as parents, that's just something that perhaps you want to just check with your school. What are they doing to deal with this Ofsted report that came out in the summer of 2021? Because it can be damaging, it can be harmful. And a lot of these issues then lead on to other issues. So things like self-harming. Children end up self-harming because they are victims of sexual abuse in school. So when we talk about sexual abuse, we might think of that word or those words as being really horrible. But actually, it covers all of these things. It covers sexting and name-calling of a sexist nature. That is all part of this sexual abuse that young people go on. And if we think back to when we were young, I'm sure at some point in our lives, we've all been the victims of bullying. It's a part of life, right? I guess the good thing, I'm using inverted commas there, about us being bullied when we were young is that when we got home, the bullying stopped. Because when we got home, the bullies couldn't get to us because we had no phones. We didn't see those people until we got to school the next day. We were safe. Now, however, children don't have that safety because most of the bullying takes place online. And so when you're in your TikTok, when you're in your Snapchat groups, when you're on WhatsApp, all of that happens online now. And so the bullying is almost 24/7, cyberbullying. So we've really got to make sure as parents that we are on the ball and just regularly having those chats with our children about their online activity and whether they're okay and whether there's any bullying they want to talk about. Make it the normal part of the conversation so that you don't just have it once a month or once every 2 months when an incident occurs. So to talk a bit about that digital world, I'm going to ask you some questions, and I just want you to think about these questions. You don't have to answer them, of course, but just something for you to think about. Firstly, do you know the digital world that your child lives in? Simple question. Do you think that you know what's going on in your child's digital world? And, obviously I can't see you, most of your cameras are off, but I don't know whether you're nodding or shaking your heads, but just an interesting question to think about. The next question, what apps do you know they use? What apps do you know that your child is using? Are they playing games on their phone, depending on their ages? What games are they playing? Do they have social media profiles? Again, which social media apps do they use? Do you know what apps they're using? Do they show you? What social media platforms is your child on? Do they tell you that they're on Facebook, but actually they've got an Instagram account? Are they on Snapchat? Are they on TikTok? Are they on Discord? Are they on other apps that you might not have heard of or know about? How do you monitor their activity? What do you do as a parent to monitor what your child is doing online? And some of you might say, actually, I don't do anything because I trust my child. And that's really nice. But we've got to be really, really wary here and careful of that trust just being a way out for us because we don't understand the online world. We don't get Snapchat. We don't know what TikTok's about. And it's easier for us to just let our kids get on with it. I'll come on to what we can do as parents a little bit later. How do you keep your child safe online? What role do you play as a parent in keeping your child safe online? And sorry, just to go back there. Yeah, so some of these questions are just really to just provoke a bit of thought in your mind. Are you really doing as much as perhaps you can be? Or do you feel that actually you should be doing a hell of a lot more? And if so, where do you start? I'm going to try and help you with some of that today. Hopefully today, actually, this conversation and you being here is the place for you to start. Now, there are some apps that I want you to be aware of. And the thing about posting a picture like this for you is that tomorrow there's going to be new apps that are created that we don't know about. So it's an evolving kind of thing. Some of these apps you might be familiar with. Discord, for example, is a popular gaming app. A lot of your children that are gamers might use Discord to communicate with each other. But of course, Discord, where they're talking to each other, they could be talking to people they don't know. A lot of racism and sexually explicit content takes place on Discord. Snapchat and TikTok are there. WhatsApp. You might think WhatsApp is a perfectly normal app for them to have. In fact, you might communicate with your kids on WhatsApp. They might be in WhatsApp groups with your family or whatever it might be. But of course, we know that WhatsApp can be used to send inappropriate messages, inappropriate images, inappropriate videos. There are some dating apps there. Badoo, Bumble, Grindr, Meet Me. They all have age limitations. But of course, people can get around that very easily. And there are people on there that might be posing or might say they are something who they are not. And then I want to just talk about this calculator app. So I've got a mosquito flying around in front of me. I'm trying to just whip it away. I want to talk about this calculator app because this is an interesting one. This is the one where actually on your child's phone, it's a calculator. And you're probably sitting there thinking, great, my son's doing maths. But actually what the calculator does when you are gone is they minimize it. And behind that calculator is a secret area that you can't access because you can't get into the calculator, where they keep files, videos, pictures that they don't want you to see. So really, I'm not saying every time they're on the calculator, should you ask them, minimize that, but it's just something for you to be aware of as a parent. It's an app where they can hide things from you in terms of what they're looking at and what they're getting up to and who they're communicating with. So really, again, I should have said at the beginning, this session is not about scaring you as parents. I really hope I don't want to scare you, but it's about trying to get you to understand that these drip conversations should be had on a regular basis between you and your children. That you're never too young to start. As soon as your child has a device, really, is that age to start having those regular conversations. So, let's talk about a couple of these apps in a bit more detail, because Snapchat, I think, is one that is very common with young people, and it's one that parents don't necessarily understand. But there are some things about Snapchat that you need to know. For example, Snapchat can expose your child's exact location. They or you may not even be aware of that. So if they're talking to people, especially people they don't know, their location is on by default on Snapchat. Also, Lens Explorer is around allowing people to create their own filters and create their own looks and create their own impressions. And actually, you can get some age-inappropriate contents being shared. Screenshots and saved messages we've talked about already. Snap streaks and addiction. There's this thing. I mean, I haven't got Snapchat, so I don't understand it so well, but I know about the app because I've learned about it so that I can do talks like this. Snap streak is when you are constantly Snapchatting your friend, and actually once you break that streak, there's usually a forfeit, and you have to do something. And actually, what happens here is people become addicted because you don't just have Snap streaks with one person; you have them with lots of people, and you have to keep going. Sexting. A lot of sexting happens on Snapchat because, of course, you as parents won't see those messages. So any inappropriate messages that children might be sending to each other, any sexting that's taking place, you're not going to see those messages because they disappear. So Snapchat is a great app for those things. And actually, there are some things that parents can do. And the National Online Safety website is a great place for you to start if you haven't looked at it already. But there are some things that you can do. Firstly, sexting. As awkward as it is, especially in our community, when was the last time, you probably remember those really awkward conversations your parents might have had with you, or indeed they may never have had them with you. About the issue of sex. But times are different. We need to get over that awkwardness, and we need to get over that taboo and start having some of those conversations with our children about sexting and sex and what's going on online. Ghost mode turns the location off, for example. So if your child is not got ghost mode on, they should put it on. And you can also restrict story view so that your child is not exposed to some of that inappropriate content that might be out there. But the National Online Safety website has some great stuff on there about some of these apps for you. The other one to really think about is TikTok. That's a really big one, again, for young people. In fact, actually, TikTok isn't just for young people anymore. Actually, there's lots of adults that use TikTok, that are on TikTok, that make TikToks. It started off a few years ago in China as an app to share dancing videos. And many people still do that, but now it's almost anything and everything. Short creation. I mean, I've got a TikTok page for my business, for example. So there are issues with TikTok, age inappropriate content that people can see, inappropriate music. TikTok has a lot of music on it, but actually lyrics that young people are exposed to and listening to can really, create a misogynistic, racist, homophobic kind of lyrics. TikTok fame. Everybody wants to be a TikTok star these days. They're desperate for followers. They're desperate for likes. And so, people become addicted and they want to do something more outrageous. What prank can we do that's going to make us famous? What outrageous stunt can we do that's going to make us famous? There's also things about in-app purchases you've got to be careful of, which is where young people, can end up buying things from TikTok and racking up huge bills on your credit card. So there are some things that you need to be aware of on TikTok, and there are some things that you can do as parents on TikTok as well. And that's, again, talking about online content. I won't stop talking about the need for you to talk about online content. Enable restricted mode, because you can restrict the amount of work that they're doing. Amount of screen time that they've got. There are apps, by the way. I think actually Apple phones and Android phones also have a screen time limiter. So you can link your phone to your child now, and you set amount of screen time they're allowed. And if they want more screen time, they have to send you a message on the phone, and you either approve or reject that. So I would definitely look into that if I were you as a parent. If you're not already using that, it comes as a standard, I think, on your phones now. So there are things that you can do to keep your child safe on TikTok. And again, more on this on the National Online Safety website. So they're the two real apps that I think parents need to be aware of, because they're the two big apps that children are using. I can see some questions are appearing on the chat, so please do continue putting questions if you have them on the chat, and I'll do my very best to answer them at the end of this presentation. So what are the dangers online? You know, what are some of the dangers that your children are exposed to? Well, firstly, cyberbullying, we've talked about already. This idea that people communicate regularly with each other, and even things like being kicked out of a WhatsApp group or a Snapchat group can have a massive impact on young people. So a lot of cyberbullying takes place online. Invasion of privacy. People might ask your children questions that you might think are a bit of an invasion of privacy. You know, things like your address. You know, where do you live, or what business is that of anybody's? But young people don't have that filter. We would know perhaps if somebody asked us that question, we wouldn't give them our address. Young people, the innocence of youth perhaps, don't have that that ability. Oversharing of information. Kids sometimes tell too much about themselves to people, especially people they don't know. You know, you'd be surprised if you ask your children how many friends they've got that they've never met. Don't be surprised if they all say they've got a few. And that's just where you've got to ask those questions. Well, who is this friend? What does this friend do? Where's this friend from? What school do they go to? If the child doesn't know what school they go to, that could be a bit of an alarm bell, because that's one thing children normally always ask each other is, where do you live and what school do you go to? But sometimes we end up oversharing information about ourselves to people that we don't know. So that's something just to be wary of. Viewing offensive images or videos. Now, offensive, of course, is different for everybody on this chat. Your version of offensive is going to be different. You know, sexual images and videos is probably offensive to all of us parents, especially if we have very young children. But also violent videos are shared. Videos of people fighting. Videos of murders are shared online. So all sorts of offensive images or videos, racist stuff, homophobic stuff, sexist stuff that you don't want your children seeing, but they have access to. And young people share this amongst themselves, by the way, in their groups. An unrealistic sense of body image. And this is a big one, because a lot of influencers that your children might follow on on Instagram. You know, the men have chiseled bodies, six packs, and they look fantastic. The women have excellent bikini bodies and wonderful tans. And young people look at those and think, I don't look like that. Why don't I look like that? Maybe I'm overweight. Maybe I'm underweight. Maybe my nose is wrong. Maybe my whatever it might be. Or indeed, actually, I want to one day look like that. How can I do that? How can I change my diet? We get people with eating disorders, and we get people with this unrealistic sense of body image because of what they're seeing online. Again, how to solve that? Regular conversations. Keep reminding them that it's perfectly okay to look the way that they do. And they don't need to take drastic action to have that bikini body or the six-pack abs. Also, obsessive focus on likes and comments. I don't know if you've ever heard your children say they posted something and it only got 2 likes. I need to delete it. I need to take it down. How embarrassing. I only got 2 likes. Well, people become obsessed with that. And actually, that's quite dangerous, because you either stop posting what's meaningful to you, or you take it to heart and you know, it impacts your mental health in a negative way. Also, something to be aware of actually on your kids' phones is some slang that they're using. Now, you're not expected to remember all of this, but what young people sometimes do is they use slang language or secret text codes. So they don't want you to understand, and some of these might catch your attention. For example, the very first one, LMIRL, let's meet in real life. You will never know that, and you might look over your child's screen and see, well, what the hell does that mean? But because you don't understand it, you might not ask. LH6, let's have sex. TDTM, talk dirty to me. PAL, parents are listening. PAW, parents are watching. PIR, parents in room. So lots of things here that children are using so that you don't understand. And I guess the advice to you as parents is, if you ever see something on your child's phone in any of their messages that you don't understand, ask them what it means. Yeah, ask them, what does it mean? You know, we all use acronyms in our life now. LOL, for example, is the biggest one that we always use. LOL means, well, depending on who you ask, either laugh out loud or lots of laughs. But the idea, we use LOL when we find something funny. Those kind of things we understand. There might be others that we might understand, but do we understand what's on the screen here? ADR, address. Somebody's asking for your address. ASL, age, sex, location. This is people. These are messages, and those emojis at the bottom people use to refer to our genitalia, certain genitalia, and something they're referring to intercourse as well. People use emojis to refer to masturbation. There's lots of things that perhaps as parents we just need to have a bit of oversight over. Most of the time, it's probably going to be innocent stuff. ILU one. I've just seen that thanks to Bollywood. Somebody knows one of them. There you go. I love you. So even in films, they're using these emojis that are raising our awareness. And again, slang that people use, general slang, incel slang. That's really for people as they get a bit older. So those of you that might have teenage children or even older, incel basically is something called involuntary celibate. And that means people who want to have sex but find that they're unable to. They can't find a partner. They just don't know who to go to. And incel is a community, and the incel community can really sort of support each other through this. But at the same time, they're very angry towards women and very angry towards men who are successful at having sex with lots of people. Also, things there about violence and drugs. Again, remember the title of this presentation. It can never happen to my child. But if you see some of this slang on there, then the truth is maybe it is happening to your child. So really just something to think about. Netflix and chill. We may know that one because that's sort of been in headlines. The idea that we'll watch Netflix and chill, but what it really means is we're going to have sex. So just things that you've got to be sort of aware of as parents. And one thing that I want to go on, which can be a bit hard hitting, is the signs for you to look out for as parents that might suggest that your child is a victim of either CSE, child sexual exploitation, or CCE, child criminal exploitation. A lot of this grooming takes place online, and it takes time. And actually, one of the podcast episodes I did was with a lady called Lauren Lefebvre, and she set up the Breck Foundation. And the Breck Foundation was, her son was called Breck, and he was being groomed online by an older friend. I think he was 13. The person he was being groomed by was 18. Breck was struggling with his sexuality and also being groomed by this young man, I guess you call him. It took a year. The grooming process took 1 year. And Breck finally arranged to meet with his groomer. And Breck lived, I think, somewhere in South London or Southwest London, arranged to meet with his groomer over in Essex and Thurrock. And sadly, what happened to Breck is he was raped and murdered by the person that groomed him. Now, when I spoke to Lauren, she said exactly the same thing as his title. I never thought it could happen to my child. And Lauren was a single parent. She had separated from her husband, but they co-parented. So Breck had told each parent that he was at the other parent's house. And it's such a simple thing, and the parents blame themselves for not even checking with the other parent, But so that's, that's obviously a real scare story. And I'm sorry if that's scaring you. That's worst case scenario. But it's just things for you to look out for. For example, is your child's attendance suffering at school? Well, if it is, ask the question why. Are they staying out late more than often? Are they experimenting a bit more with drug and alcohol, depending on the age of your child? Is their behaviour very secretive? Are they, especially if they're young, are they talking in a way that perhaps suggests that they would be much older? Are they using sexualized language or behaviour that you haven't taught them, or you don't think they should understand? Are they becoming friends with older people? Are they suddenly friends with older children or even older adults? Another one is gifts. If your child comes home with a gift that you didn't give them, you need to ask them where that gift comes from, because what groomers often do is they hang around outside school gates. So when your child leaves school, they listen to groups. And let's say your child is saying, I want to buy a pair of new trainers, but my mum said she can't afford them. She has to wait till she gets paid. I really want them. I'm desperate for them. What the groomer will do is turn up at the gates the next day and have those exact trainers for your child. But of course, now your child owes them something. In the case of child criminal exploitation, again, one of my episodes, I actually spoke to somebody who ran his own county line. And that means he ran his own drug distribution using young people. And what happens is a young person, again, they hear these conversations. They might say to a young person, look, I want you to drop something off, usually from a city to a rural area. So depending on where you all are, it'd be from London, let's say, into rural Essex. I want you to drop this box off to somebody and you'll get £20 for it. Young person says, brilliant. Yeah, thank you. What happens is on the way to dropping that box off, and the box might be something completely innocent. It could be a box of paper. But on the way to dropping that box off to where they're going, the groomers arrange for the person to be robbed, and that box is stolen. And now what? Your child has to go back to the groomer and say, look, the box got stolen. The groomer then says to your child, right, you owe me now. You owe me what was in that box. It was £100 worth of stuff, and I gave you £20. Then what happens is they start getting involved in the gang, and they start transporting more and more things because they owe the groomer. And the groomer's obviously a bit of a gangster as well. And that whole cycle becomes dangerous. You become involved in what's called county lines. So all of these things are really just things to be looking out for. And it all comes, again, just to have those conversations, those regular conversations that you're having with your child. So what can you do as parents, before I sort of start taking some of these questions? What can you do as parents really to just try and keep your child safe online? There are some things that you can do, and it starts with that open communication, of course. Set up parental controls on the home internet and mobile phones. Your internet provider will advise you on how to do this. Your mobile phone provider will advise you on how to do this. They will have their own systems they can put in. You might be able to Google some other ones. Obviously, the truth is, as the older your child gets, the easier they're going to find it to get around this. But you should definitely have parental controls. It doesn't mean just because they're clever and they can get around it, it doesn't mean you shouldn't have them in place. Also supervise online activities where appropriate. A lot of parents that I speak to, I'm so surprised at how many of them allow their children to use their own devices in their own room. And that's worrying, because you've got no idea what your child is doing if they're in their own room. So, for example, if you have a desktop or a laptop that's a shared one, well, actually, if your child needs to use it for homework, they have to do it in the living room. That doesn't mean you're sitting right next to them, looking over their shoulder. But what that means is the child knows there's a chance that you might walk in. There's a chance that you might glance at the laptop. But if they're in their own room, against their bed, even if you walk into the room, they're going to quickly hit the X button on whatever they're looking at by the time you get to their bed. So those kinds of small things. If they've got mobile phones, have an agreement with them about charging those phones overnight downstairs rather than in their room, because it means after 10 o'clock or 9 o'clock or whatever time is bedtime, they're not checking their phones, they're not using their phones regularly. Set your expectations. Talk about what's important to you, what your expectations are. But it's really important, and this is my favorite thing, and I call it a digital charter. A digital charter is an agreement you have with your children about screen time and device usage. And you come up with this together. You all have an input, including your children. For example, let's say you sit at the dinner table tomorrow, and depending on your personal circumstances, obviously I know the audience that I'm talking to, if you're co-parenting, you can do it with your children's your other parent. If you're not on those terms with your child's parent, then of course it's something you would have to do on your own, but get your children involved. For example, mobile phones, the classic one. You say to your children, my rule is you cannot use your phones after 8 o'clock. Your children say, look, we need our phones until 10 o'clock. Then you come up with a compromise. Okay, let's agree on 9 o'clock. After 9, no phones. But remember, the rule applies to everybody. That includes you. You can't say, I'm too busy checking my emails, I've got to work, I need to check my emails at 9:30. So come up with your set of rules for internet and phone usage. What's important to you? What's important to your children? What can they watch? What don't you want them to watch? And then that charter, you type it up, you print it out, and you stick it on the fridge. Because if anybody then breaks that charter, you remind each other. You say, son, we agreed you would not play Fortnite after 6 p.m, but I can see that at 7:30 and you're playing it. Or your son might say to you, Dad or Mum, you said you wouldn't use your phone past 9:30, but you're using it at the dinner table, whatever it is that's important to you. But that digital charter is something I would definitely advise you do. Communicate regularly about the digital world. Share information that you've learned. Educate yourselves. Something you've read in the paper or whatever it might be. But at the same time, listen to your child without judgment. If they're going to tell you something, let them talk to you without the feeling that you're going to judge them. Because if you start judging them, that's the last conversation they're going to have with you about this topic, or indeed about whatever difficult topic it might be. Go online together and find things that interest you. Yes, as your children get older, they want to spend less time with you as parents. That's just the nature of being a parent. But actually, if you're both interested in, I don't know, football, well, why don't you go online together and research a bit about football, about your favorite team, about their scores, about some of your favorite players. Make them realize the online world is full of great stuff as well. The internet is full of so much, so many wonders that we can teach our children with and we learn from for ourselves. Do it together. But also it's really important that if your child has an interest that you have no interest in, learn to be interested in it for your child. So if your child likes football, but you can't stand football, Well, maybe go online together. Take an interest in their interests. That's really crucial. Educate yourself on the digital world and things that might cause harm to your child. I'm going to share with you some resources that you can look at and some websites that you can go on to raise your own awareness about the digital world, about these apps, about some of these things that we're talking about, so that you're armed with something when you talk to your child about it, to say, actually, I read this article, I'm really worried about your use of Discord. Can we just talk about it, please? Can we just have a conversation about how you're using it so that I know you're safe? It's just to keep you safe. It's not to pry, it's not to look at what you're doing. It's just so that I know as your mum, as your dad, that you're safe. Don't take inappropriate steps. If your child does something wrong, don't threaten them with radical steps like cutting off the internet. You know, you got told off at school today, or you're using your phone too much, that's it. I'm cancelling your contract. Because there's two problems here. One, if you cut off the internet, it's going to impact you too. Two, at some point, you're going to put the internet back on because you need it. Okay, so cutting off their supply, cutting off their internet supply is like cutting off their blood supply. I know that sounds ridiculous, but the digital world is as important to your child as the physical world is. They live in two worlds. You might only live in one. You might be able to put your phone down and separate yourself from digital and social media. For your children, it's almost impossible to do that. So don't take these radical steps because their phones are important to them. You take their phone away from them, you may as well cut their arm off. You wouldn't cut their arm off, would you? Because they're your child. So don't take their phone off from them. I mean, sort of for a long period of time, of course, have that digital charter, have that agreement, and they've got to have consequences when they do something wrong, but make those consequences practical, manageable, and sensible, ultimately. And the most important thing, and it's a big thing in the Indian and the Asian community, what we don't do is we don't ask for help. We're worried about being judged. We're worried about that word besti, aren't we? We're worried about what people will say about us, what our families will say about us. Oh, my 9-year-old was told off at school because he was watching porn on his phone. How on earth can I share that with my family? I better just deal with it myself. Are you equipped with the tools to deal with it properly? Probably not. So don't be afraid, please. Ask for help. Don't worry about what people think. At the end of the day, this is about keeping your child safe. And I guess the overarching message here is to really make sure you're communicating regularly with your child. Drip communicate. Talk about trivial things about the internet, but have those conversations regularly. Don't wait until something happens. And then you'll be saying, I thought it could never happen to my child because we're raising really good children. Even really good children can be victims of online grooming, for example. So when Aruna shares this slides with you, obviously you'll be able to access these resources, but there's some great websites that you can go on that will provide you with lots and lots of information. And the NSPCC, National Online Safety, I've mentioned. Natta Hub, especially if you have primary school children, Natta Hub is really good for that. Mind in terms of mental health, Parent Zone, the UK Safer. I mean, there's all of these provide you with some great information just around educating yourself about the internet and how to keep, and giving you practical advice and guidance about, how to keep your children safe online. There are things that you can do. I mean, if you feel that you want to speak to me a bit more, then of course, like I said to you, availability for parent inclusion in the workplace, availability for keynote speaking. I'm available to work with you in a coaching capacity. Feel free to book a call with me. I'm going to share my social media handles with you as well, because I do a lot of posting around parenting, around how to make life easier for you as parents, but also raising awareness around some of those parenting issues that people might have. So if we go back to the objectives, really, I said at the beginning, we're going to open up a dialogue about digital parenting to ensure you feel more confident about your child's digital world. I hope we've opened up that dialogue. I know a lot of what I've talked about is probably very scary, and you might go away from this thinking, my God, I need to take drastic action. Don't. Okay? Educate yourself first, and then start having that communication with your child, and make that regular. And remember, don't make anything a taboo subject. If it's about sex, if it's about pornography, don't make it a taboo. Normalize those conversations so that if your child is in danger, or if your child does something wrong, you are their safe person to talk to. The last thing you want, for example, is your child to get his or her sex education from porn because you're too afraid or too embarrassed to talk to them about sex. We need to move on from that, and we need to have these open conversations and open dialogue. So if you did want to reach out to me, and you did want to follow me on my social medias, all of my social medias are there. I'm very active on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and indeed on TikTok, where I just provide guidance, advice to parents around the parenting space, really. and also the podcast details are there as well. And feel free to get in touch with me. I hope that presentation was useful. I hope you picked up something from it.